It's, as President Zelensky said, one of the most brazen and complex attacks by the Russian side. Drones, missiles.
Personal rhetoric coming from Russia. And that is not going to deter our support for Ukraine.
Keir Starmer stood in Kyiv, boldly warning Putin that Britain was ready to escalate support for Ukraine if Russian aggression continued.
In my clear message that we need to ensure that Ukraine has what is needed for as long as is needed to win this war against Putin.
Less than 72 hours later, the skies over Ukraine were filled with 108 Russian drones targeting critical infrastructure across multiple regions. Putin didn't just ignore Starmer's threats. He responded with one of the largest drone attacks of the conflict, timed perfectly to make Britain's new Prime Minister look utterly powerless on the world stage.
Air Force says Russia launched more than 200 drones and missiles in a massive aerial attack across the country overnight.
What does this humiliating response tell us about Starmer's diplomatic standing and Britain's diminishing influence in global affairs? The timeline reveals a sobering reality. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. Starmer's trip to Kyiv marked his first significant foreign policy move as Prime Minister. Standing alongside President Zelensky, he attempted to project strength and commitment to Ukraine's cause. The visit wasn't merely symbolic. Starmer was staking his diplomatic credibility on Britain's continued support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. His calculated warning to Moscow promised intensified support if Putin continued his military campaign, language that international observers initially viewed as appropriately firm but measured. What Starmer failed to appreciate was the geopolitical reality of Britain's diminished standing post-Brexit. The UK no longer carries the same weight in international diplomacy that it once did. Yet Starmer approached this confrontation as if Britain remained a global superpower. For a new Prime Minister desperate to establish authority on the world stage, this miscalculation proved devastating. Putin's response came swiftly and with brutal clarity. Just 72 hours after Starmer's warnings, Russia launched one of the most extensive drone attacks of the entire conflict.
The Ukrainian capital of Kyiv was the primary target. Officials in the city say at least 8 people were killed and dozens wounded, and that includes children.
This wasn't merely a continuation of hostilities, it was a direct and calculated response to Starmer's threats. The timing made Putin's message unmistakable. Your warnings mean absolutely nothing. The scale of the attack was unprecedented. 108 drones targeting critical infrastructure across multiple Ukrainian regions simultaneously. This wasn't a random military action, but a carefully orchestrated demonstration of Russian capabilities and resolve.
Well, it's the Putin, Russian's army that is not clearly interested in peace by doing this brazen attack.
Despite Ukrainian claims of intercepting 55 drones and another 30 malfunctioning, the damage was extensive and deliberate. The geographic spread of the attack further emphasized Putin's contempt for Starmer's warnings. Kherson, Odessa, Zaporizhzhia, and multiple regions across northern and eastern Ukraine all faced simultaneous strikes. Critical infrastructure and residential areas suffered significant damage.
It's, as President Zelensky said, one of the most brazen and complex attacks by the Russian side. Drones, missiles.
Disrupting civilian life and undermining Ukrainian morale. The comprehensive nature of the attack demonstrated Russia's continued ability to strike anywhere in Ukraine despite Western support.
I think we have a deal with Russia. We have to get a deal with Zelensky, and I hope that Zelensky, I thought it might be easier to deal with Zelensky. So far, it's been harder.
What Putin communicated through this massive assault wasn't subtle. It was a public humiliation of Starmer on the international stage. The message was clear. Britain's diplomatic threats carry no weight in Moscow. For a Prime Minister who had positioned this visit as a demonstration of Britain's continued global influence, the Russian response exposed the hollow reality behind Starmer's diplomatic posturing. But the humiliation didn't end with this devastating drone attack. As Starmer's warnings lay thoroughly dismissed, another Western figure entered the diplomatic arena with a markedly different approach to the conflict. Former President Trump's intervention would only further highlight the ineffectiveness of Starmer's diplomatic strategy and Britain's diminished standing in global affairs. While Starmer's threats were being brutally dismissed by Putin's drone barrage, Donald Trump stepped into the diplomatic arena with a markedly different approach. The former president called for a 30-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, surprisingly aligning himself with several European leaders. Unlike Starmer's vague promises of intensified support, Trump's intervention came with specific teeth. He warned that if Russia violated the proposed truce, the United States and its allies would impose harsher sanctions. The contrast between the two Western leaders couldn't be more revealing. Starmer chose performative diplomacy with empty threats, while Trump offered a concrete timeframe and clear consequences. The difference in Putin's response to each speaks volumes about Britain's current standing on the world stage. Following Trump's intervention, Putin agreed, at least in principle, to send a delegation to Istanbul for peace talks. The same leader who had just humiliated Starmer with 108 drones was now willing to engage in diplomatic discussions.
Possible rhetoric coming from Russia, and that is not going to deter our support for Ukraine.
This stark difference in Putin's approach reveals the painful truth about Britain's diminished influence under Starmer's leadership. Putin dismissed Starmer's warnings with contempt, but engaged with Trump's proposal, calculating that American influence still matters, while British threats can be publicly mocked without consequence. President Zelensky maintained his position that any meaningful peace deal must begin with a complete ceasefire, highlighting the fundamental disagreement between the parties. He insisted that real diplomacy cannot coexist with continued bloodshed, a principle that stands in sharp contrast to Putin's strategic violence. For Starmer, the domestic political fallout of this international humiliation could be severe. British voters have watched their new Prime Minister issue threats that were almost immediately met with one of the largest drone attacks of the entire conflict. This demonstration of diplomatic impotence raises serious questions about Starmer's judgment and Britain's current standing in the world. Putin's response, both its timing and its scale, reveals a sobering new geopolitical reality facing Britain. The message from Moscow is unmistakable. Post-Brexit Britain under Starmer's leadership is no longer considered a significant diplomatic power worthy of serious engagement. While Russia remains willing to at least superficially engage with American diplomacy, British warnings are treated as irrelevant noise to be publicly dismissed. The sequence of events, from Starmer's ineffective threats to Putin's massive escalation to Trump's intervention, raises profound questions about Britain's place in the global order. Has Starmer's diplomatic strategy already failed? And what does this public humiliation reveal about his capacity to protect British interests on the increasingly dangerous world stage? The entire episode exposes the painful reality of Britain's position in today's world order. Starmer issues what he believes are meaningful threats. Putin responds with overwhelming force. And when Trump speaks, Russia suddenly shows interest in diplomacy. This isn't merely embarrassing, it's revelatory. British voters who care about their country's global standing should question whether Starmer possesses the diplomatic skill to navigate these dangerous waters. Putin's willingness to publicly humiliate Starmer while engaging with Trump suggests a fundamental weakness in the Prime Minister's approach to international relations. These consequences won't remain confined to Ukraine, but may reshape Britain's global influence for years to come.